Today's guest is Mike Maines. This artist from Nashville has been winning crowds over with his heartfelt songwriting, and it recently announced a huge 2021 tour. Welcome, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So let's start you back to the beginning of your story. Where did music first come, or where were you born and raised, and how did music first come into your life?
Yeah, man. So I was born in Denver, and that was about it. And then I grew up predominantly in the Midwest in Michigan, bounced around quite a bit, but I remember being glued to whatever speaker was closest at a very young age. I was just drawn to the voices and the stories they told, and that 3.5 moment in time was sort of a little timed capsule for me to crawl into and escape to anywhere other than where I was. And that was predominantly because I moved around a lot, didn't have a lot of stability, and I think I found a sense of stability in the music. And so, I mean, from a very, very early age, I've just been drawn to it.
That's amazing. What kind of music were you listening to? What was around you? Was it family musical at all, or was it just you?
No, family is not a person in my family can hold a pitch in a bucket, as they say in the South. And I mean, my dad just loved music, so he listened to a lot of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Neil Young, and a lot of early 90s grunge like Nirvana and Cranberries. So that was an early education on rock and roll. And then I I was always curious too about, just taking a band like Nirvana for instance. I'd listen to them and go, oh well, where did this music come from? And then I'd learned that, oh well, David Bowie really influenced Kurt Cobain, and David Bowie was really influenced by John Lennon, who was really influenced, and it just, the list goes on and on and on. So I was always interested in the historical aspect too, as if, if music is a river with all these different strands, represented through genre. I'm fascinated by where those genres intersect, and then also if you swim upstream enough, where do all of those different genres begin? And a lot of music comes from Africa, a lot of the good music.
Yeah,
But that's a relative thing to say. But yeah, I mean,
that's amazing. What's your favorite historical period for music?
I would say if I could go anywhere, it would be the 60s with Bob Dylan, and when like the Beach Boys and the Beatles were releasing their best work. Like Pet Sounds is my favorite record by the Beach Boys, and I read that before that album came out, John Lennon and Paul McCartney met with a guy who was in England to promote that album, and they wanted to listen to it. So they snuck into the meeting, got the guy to give them a copy of the album. They listened to it, and they're like, "Oh gosh, we've got to be able to respond to this from our side of the pond." And then Pet Sounds gave birth to the Beatles, um, Sergeant Pepper's. So that to me, that period of music in Laurel Canyon, California, that gave birth to, I mean, would go on to give birth to Tom Petty. The Beatles spent a lot of time there. The Byrds. I mean, that just beautiful gold mine of music on the West Coast, constantly ping-ponging back and forth with England on music was pretty special.
Yeah, that's an amazing time. I mean, everyone's just
Yeah.
so innovative, and it seems like it was the first time that it really took the pop world by storm, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. When did you first start writing your own music? Like, when did you first pick up an instrument or anything like that?
Yeah, I was drawn to drums first, and my family understandably didn't support that decision because I wanted to sleep at night. But after that, I I took a poet. I had a literature and English class in eighth grade, and started writing poetry. And for that class, and then that poetry was published, and I thought, oh, that's cool. I guess I'm good at this. And then I took a choir class that same year and got an A in that class. And I thought, well, if you kind of smash words and melody together, I guess you have a song. And that came quickly to me, and it came very natural. And then I was showing, the songs that I'd written to friends, and they're like, you stole that from somebody. That's too good. So it was I guess a little trailhead for me to follow in terms of my creative path, because I knew this comes naturally. I'm a terrible athlete, but I can do this. So that, yeah, probably 13, 14, 15 is when I got really serious about it.
That's awesome. What were your first songs like compared to your songs now?
All my very, very first songs sounded like Metallica and like Godsmack, and just like these really heavy, angry, like top 40 like metal bands, like Static X, Disturbed, like all these really, really aggressive bands. And then I fell in love with Blink-182 the end of my ninth grade year of high school. And so then it started writing a lot of punk rock songs. So this mixture of like angsty metal, heavy rock and roll with like punk rock. But I was drawn to that rebellious energy and both of those genres. I think it kind of gave me a place to feel safe and less alone in the emotions that I had kicking around on the inside of me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have a similar story too. So I can understand, especially middle school. I feel like that's kind of where the whole pop punk thing really kicks off for a lot of people.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So what was the music like as you were moving? I mean, were you ever able to perform or anything like that when you moved so much as in your youth? Or how'd that go for you?
Yeah, I didn't, outside of classes and exams for a vocal class or a poetry class, I didn't do any performing until I guess it would have been ninth or 10th grade. And I started a band with some friends in school. That band would just play for I get, yeah, so that in my ninth grade year, I had a band. We would literally just play during lunch for our friends, but I could kind of get a feel for the songs that were working, that people liked listening to, didn't like listening to. And then after that, when I started my first real serious band in high school, that would have been 11th grade. And that was the band I was in for 11th, 12th grade. And then the first year or so I was out of high school. We just started doing shows at VFW halls. I mean, anywhere that would let us play, parties at colleges with a bunch of drunk college students, we'd play anywhere.
That's awesome. What kind of music were those bands?
The first one was very, very heavily influenced by Blink-182. And then the next band was this weird cocktail of bands like, oh man, I'm reaching way back into my memory. Like bands like Thursday. I was really into this band called Thursday, another band called Murder by Death. It was this really incredible band out of Bloomington, Indiana. They had a cello player. They're still doing music and kicking butt, but they always toured with these metal bands. And so they're like these indie rockers with a cellist on tour with these metal bands. So they stuck out like a sore thumb and people just loved them. So I wanted to start a band that had that sort of cinematic nature to it, but also the angst of a lot of the emo bands that I was getting into. So it was like started metal, then punk rock, and then that punk rock kind of graduated into emo music. And that's all I really wanted to do, but meanwhile, I respected bands like Coldplay at a distance. Like I listened to their singles. I knew that what they were doing was important, but I just didn't want to make that kind of music. I was really into emo, and that's kind of where I parked the car for a while. And then I would say after that, that main band in high school, that's where I kind of started to notice, oh, there's these certain genres where if you write songs and kind of bang around within these limitations, the music will age well and be timeless for years to come. And that is, is where I've really tried to kind of hone my craft over the last 10 years.
Interesting. That's so cool. When did you realize that music's what you wanted to do? Like, was it a steady incline towards that? Or was it like there was a single moment you can think of where it's like it just clicked with you?
Man, there's a lot of moments. I mean, going to any concert, I remember being a kid and seeing like Leanne Rimes, just amazing country singer, when I was probably in like fourth or fifth grade, and I was like, oh, I want to do that. I remember seeing Toby Keith a year later at like a country fair, because we kind of grew up in the middle of nowhere in northern Michigan. And I just thought, sing songs, entertain to like thousands of people who are all singing your songs back to you. I want to do that. And then I started going to shows. And then I was 15 years old. It was a Thursday. It was July 3rd, 2003. I went to see the band Thursday on a Thursday, day before the 4th of July. And Murder by Death was opening that show, as well as a band called Every Time I Die. So at this venue called The Intersection in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I showed up wearing my black Atticus t-shirt, my black Dickies, my Adidas Samba tennis shoes, and like my skateboarder sweatband. And I remember, again, because I stuck out like a sore thumb in my school for the music I listened to and the way that I dressed. Then I went to the show and I'm like, wait a second. There's like 5 other people who look like me. There's like this whole other subterranean subculture of human beings that look, talk, think, and feel the same way I do. What is this? And then during that show, when Thursday played, there was just this moment where the front man was singing and looked me straight in the eye. And I was like, whatever was on in, whatever ghost was haunting him got on the inside of me. And I knew in that moment at that show that night, I'm going to play music for the rest of my life and I'll never look back. And here I am.
That's an amazing story. It's crazy. There's sometimes those moments just come and you never know when to expect them, but that's awesome to hear. So eventually, you graduated high school. What was your step after high school? Did you go to college? Did you move to Nashville? What was your...
Yeah. So after high school, I did the band for about a year. I got accepted to a college, but I couldn't. And in retrospect, I wish I would have gone to college, and I wish I would have studied music and music theory and songwriting. I think there's a lot that I could have learned and grown from, or even just studied business. But back then, I couldn't see the value in college for myself at that time, because most of the friends that I knew were getting degrees they weren't passionate about to satisfy the unlived dream of their parents who were footing the bill for that education. And I saw through all of that in an early age and just thought, college is expensive. It's a for-profit business. And I don't think that that's wrong. You need to make money. But I just thought getting out of a 4-year program with $150,000 in debt just seemed insane to me, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to pull off getting a full ride. So I bypassed that, left the band about 1.5 years after high school, and then got kind of like had this like radical faith experience with a church in Owasso, Michigan. I just got really involved in that church, and I went and got my bachelor's degree in biblical studies and was going to be like a pastor. I wanted to be like a reverend, and that's what I thought. I was going to go and like start churches and travel all the world and preach the good news, and had a kind of, I wouldn't say like a deconstruction, but I moved away from that church, moved to Texas, lived alone in an apartment, started working at a casino, and I didn't lose my faith, but I began to recontextualize it and sort of the songs I wanted to write and the life I wanted to live. And I knew that I couldn't really do that within the walls of a church. And working at this casino, I started seeing, it was like this front row seat to like the worst and best parts of humanity at any given moment, right? Like there's these 85-year-old women chain smoking Virginia Slims, putting $100 bills into slot machines, $200 at a time, and just cranking it for hours on end. I'm like, I don't even know where the money comes from. What are they doing? And at the same time, walking past 100 machines where people are losing all their money, then there's this one woman who wins like $50,000, so it's like tragedy, comedy, and a fairy tale kind of all mixed together in this casino. And that became a bit of a creative laboratory for me to pull from as I started writing my own songs when I was living in an apartment down there in Texas, and then found dudes that I was going to church with to start playing with. The gal that would later become my wife was in Michigan, and I started sending her songs. And so cobbled all that together and put it in a van and never looked back.
Wow, that's amazing. And so cool how you articulate that, like how you put that into words. I mean, the casino thing is especially interesting to think about. What role does or did faith have in your music at that time and now?
And early on, I mean, when we started the band, it felt very, I would say evangelical. I mean, in a way, we felt like kind of maybe some of that same kind of fire that like early U2 records had, where it's like we felt like we were going to evangelize the world, man. We wanted to tell, we wanted to shout it from the mountains. And then I just got tired of playing shows and rapping every night and saying like, and just so you know, like, this is what we believe. And it felt like it stripped the mystery from the show and the music. It's almost like standing next to someone that understands a lot about astrology, and you're watching the sunset, and they're like, well, actually, the sun is doing that because of all the gases, and they're all like, you're just like, shut up, Derek. I just want to enjoy the sunset, like just enjoy it, just take it in. And so I kind of wanted to allow that mystery to be this nameless thing that existed during our show that people couldn't quite put their finger on, but also knew that it was undeniable. That kind of moment that you have where, you're at a show and you can tell that the person who's performing believes every word, and it makes your blood sizzle, and you get that sort of hot rush. That's what I was after. And I think naming it, it just strips it, it takes it all away. I don't know. And then, so now, faith-wise, I think it still works its way in there. And on the album that we're working on right now, there's definitely songs that are a bit more of, I would say, a critique of the church and the way that I feel because I am a part of that. Feel like we've really failed America. I feel like we failed Black people. I feel like we failed the LGBTQ community. And people just kind of know when they think about the word Christian or follower of Christ, they feel like they know what you're against far more than what you're for. And so there's definitely now a bit more of a critique that I'm finding myself giving myself and anyone that would consider themselves a part of that tribe.
Yeah, I love hearing that. That's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, I'm a huge U2 fan, so I can see what you're saying. Where like they used to be so gung ho about being very blunt with their religion, and then over time, I think maybe they had the same thought where it's like they start to give it more mystery and start to let people decide for themselves if it's about God or whatever. People know they're religious, but not necessarily that these songs are religious. And I think that kind of helps preserve what these songs can mean to people in so many different ways. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's great to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what took you to Nashville? Like what ultimately led you there, and what was your experience like first moving out there?
Yeah. So we toured Nashville on one of our very first tours, and I immediately felt pulled into its orbit, and in a way that no other city drew me. The only other the only other two cities that I adored were LA and in New York. But Nashville to me felt like the a lot of the things that I loved about Brooklyn, but if you just kind of knocked it all down and spread it out, and there's a bit more breathing room. So it's a big city, but it has a bit of like a small town feel. And I think that ethos gelled well with me because of where I'm from and what I grew up with. And people are just very, very kind here, and were early on. They just kind of all realized, hey, we've moved to this town to chase our dreams. We're all in this together. Like the rising tide lifts all ships. It's a very real thing in this city, which I love. So, but when we first came, we were broke, man. We were living off of $5 a day, touring, and the idea of actually affording a home, paying a mortgage, and being able to do music was a pipe dream at that time. We were just killing ourselves to play shows and get back home and work our day jobs. So ultimately, though, that was about 7 or 8 years ago. I started writing songs with and for other artists, and some of those songs will get put in TV shows or movies or advertisements, and that kind of took off without me trying too hard. I just kind of fell into it. And so as that took off, I thought, well, if I move a little closer to the fire, perhaps I'll get warmer, right? And so we decided to take the plunge about a year and a half. It'll be 2 years ago in October, and about 6 months before COVID hit. But we've loved it so far. I'm looking forward to things getting a little bit back to normal, as they say, so that we can build more of a community. But besides that, it's been a great move.
That's awesome. Yeah. What's something you wish you would have known or learned in the first year or two of being in Nashville that you had to learn later? So in hindsight, what would you wish you would have known then?
Give someone the opportunity to say no. Don't be afraid to shoot someone a DM on Instagram if you're a fan of their work, a producer, a songwriter, an artist. People are friendly, and people most of the time, if they're not overwhelmingly crushed by deadlines, they're willing to hang out and help somebody out. I would have stuck my neck out a little bit more early on.
Interesting. That's a good point. And I think that's hugely beneficial to other artists out there too. I mean, some people I think are just afraid to pull that trigger, but you never know what's going to happen. So that's awesome. So what are you working on now, and what are you excited for that's coming up?
Yeah. So right now we are finishing touches on our most recent album that we just finished. Guitars are done. We're tracking pianos, synths, and then vocals starting next week. So I'm excited about that. It just feels like a really solid record. We've written about things we've never written about. We've done some things musically we've never done, and I always love feeling like I'm climbing a little higher up the tree and walking out onto a really thin branch. It's like it could crack, but it's also kind of fun to be here, So I always want to feel like I'm skating on thin ice, because that fear of falling through kind of keeps me on my toes. And so this record was pretty sonically adventurous for us, and I'm so giddy to share it with the world. I'm really excited for people to hear it, but all in the proper timing. And then as far as stuff that's coming up really, really soon, we're doing a tour this summer, beginning in June. And we're calling it the Backyard Tour. So we typically, in recent years, we've done a living room tour where we'll play someone's living room or backyard. And, we try to keep it between 50 or 100 people, because then if it gets much more than that, it doesn't really feel as intimate. And the shows are selling out really quick which we're grateful for. And that just excites us to go and see our fans. You know, we haven't played shows in over a year. And so, you know, knowing that people are getting tickets, it just shows us that people are excited about music again, you know? So we're looking forward to that.
That's so cool. When can we expect the album, do you think? And what do you hope the album accomplishes for you guys?
Oh man. I would say you can expect new music by the end of the year. And as far as a new release, I would hope that the new, you know, the album dropping, I would hope by the latest of early next year. And as far as accomplishments, I just hope that we can get as many people to listen to it as possible, and that those people would want to come and see us play live, because that for me is it's the sweetest reward ever. You know, we're hanging out right now, and this is my home studio where I make all my music, and I love being in here. I'm in here every day, but nothing beats a song that you wrote when you were by yourself, having a good day or maybe a bad day, but then you go to Utah or Portland or LA and you play this song to a room full of people who sing it back to you. It's just one of the most magical feelings in the world. So I'm looking forward to experiencing that again.
That's so special. That's awesome, man. Do you have a dream venue you want to play someday?
Oh man, I'd love to play. I'd love to play the Ryman in Nashville. I would love to play. Oh man, I'd love to play Red Rocks. I would say out of all places, I would love to play Red Rocks. My mother stood there with me the year I graduated high school, and I was standing on that stage just looking up and dreaming. And she said, she told me that at the, you know, when we left that day, she said, "You're gonna play here someday." And that's all, for whatever reason, that's just always stuck with me, you know. And but out of all the places for me, I would say Red Rocks would be the absolute dream.